Geht gleich los. Geht gleich los, ne? Du musst nur aufpassen, hier ist eine Kamera. Da bitte nicht davor stehen. Lieber davor sitzen.
Alle so reindrehen mal. Für die Seite. Turn here, please. Turn here, please. Turn
Everybody to the straight ahead. Lea! If you look at the top as well. Please, Virginie, viens là. Virginie, viens s'il vous plaît. Hey, young lady, tell her to look up. Right side,
Can you turn to us?
One never look on this side.
And first row, please. First row. Excuse me. Down, please.
Der Eröffnungsfilm dieser Berlinale kam in diesem Jahr aus Frankreich.
This year's opening film comes from France. It is a film by Benoît Jacot, Farewell My Queen, starring Diane Kruger. We witness France on the eve of the French Revolution. A reader of the Queen becomes a witness to how the wealthy try to protect their vested interests. The rich trying to protect their riches. Sounds very familiar in these times of crisis, and indeed, this is not just your usual period film, but the characters come across as being extremely contemporary, despite carrying historic costumes. A film full of irony, but equally dramatic. This is the press conference for the opening film of the Berlinale.
Ça, moi, je sais absolument pas me servir de ces trucs-là, mais... Hein? Non, mais c'est un clip, ça se clip. Mais quelle horreur! Merci Léa. Oups. Et après, de ça, on se sert, faut changer de chaîne ou quoi? Non, ça vient tout seul?
Yep. Ja, meine Damen und Herren, herzlich willkommen zur ersten
So, ladies and gentlemen,
Pressekonferenz im Wettbewerb in diesem
a
Jahr.
very warm
Wir
welcome
begrüßen
to
herzlich
the
den
first competition press conference this year. We'd like to welcome the opening film of the 62nd Berlin International Film Festival.
Und zwar Adieu, les adieux à la reine, farewell my queen.
Les adieux à la reine, farewell my queen.
Wir beginnen die Vorstellung wie immer von
And as ever, we'll start on the right-hand side, and I'd like to welcome
Gilles Torrent.
Gilles Torrent, scriptwriter.
Und dem herzlich willkommen den Produzenten
A very warm welcome
Jean-Pierre
to the
Guérin.
producer, Jean-Pierre Guérin.
In der Rolle der Gabrielle de Polignac, herzlich
Playing
willkommen.
Gabrielle de Polignac, a very warm
Virginie
welcome
Ledoyen.
to Virginie Ledoyen.
Es ist eine Weile her, das letzte Mal war sie hier.
It's been a
in
while
der
since you were in
Berlinale.
Berlin. The last time was
Erinnere
with
sich
the
einige
beach.
noch.
Perhaps
In
some
der
of you
Rolle
might recall
der
that.
Sidonie Lado.
Playing Sidonie,
Herzlich willkommen,
a
Lea
warm
Seydoux.
welcome to Lea Seydoux.
Im Panorama.
In 1996,
Le
in
Fils
the
Seul.
Panorama,
Heute heißt
A
es
Single
willkommen der
Girl,
Regisseur
a warm welcome to
Benoît
the
Jacot.
director, Benoît Jacot.
Und ein Gast, der eigentlich schon zum Festival
And a guest
gehört.
who's
Wir
really
haben
part and
letztes Jahr das
parcel
Festival
of the
mit ihr
festival.
beendet. Wir
Last year
freuen
we
uns ganz
ended the
besonders,
festival
dass
with
wir
her,
heute
and we're
jetzt
delighted
eröffnen. Herzlich
now to
willkommen,
open
Marie Antoinette.
this
Die Rolle
festival
der
with
Marie
her, Diana
Antoinette.
Kruger, playing Marie Antoinette.
Auch neben mir herzlich willkommen die
Next to me
Produzentin
is
Christina Larsen.
the other producer, the co-producer, Christina Larson. A very warm welcome to you too.
Da vorne ist gleich eine Frage.
There's a question
Warten Sie
here
auf das
at the
Mikrofon.
front. Please do remember to wait for the microphone.
Hi, congratulations, everybody. Stephen Shaver here for Boston Herald. I wonder, Diane, what was your biggest challenge for such a well-known historical figure of Marie Antoinette? And do you see this as the lesbian version of Marie Antoinette, something we never might have known about before?
Well, I think whenever you are portraying a historical figure, a lot of people already have opinions about that figure. What she should look like, whether they liked her or not. A lot of people have, especially in the case of Marie Antoinette, judged her. You know, some think she was a poor little party girl that was, put in a situation that she was just overwhelmed by. Others think she was, a terrible queen and spoiled and rotten. So I was trying to not judge her. The movie is very weirdly intimate. We see Marie Antoinette in her chambers, in her bedrooms. And the reason I really felt like I could bring something to the part, we have the same origins, right? I am about the same age as she was when she was taken from Versailles. And I felt like there were enough things that I identified with. I could relate to her as a woman, being betrayed by Gabrielle, her love, the one person that she trusted and loved. It was a very difficult part because you only see her in vignettes, right? So the movie takes place the 14th, 15th, 16th, and 17th of July. So on the 14th, she doesn't know the Bastille has been taken. So this is when you really see her as she's been portrayed before, sort of aloof and, doesn't have a care in the world. And then the next time she's heard about what happened in Paris, and I think what's coming is dooming on her, and she finally realizes that things are coming to an end. and every scene that I was in was completely different. Like there was never a line, you know, you could relate to. So it was very extreme in emotions. You know, the way Benoit saw her, she's borderline crazy a little bit, you know. So it was a challenging, definitely one of the most challenging parts I've had. And then it's 18th century French, which doesn't help either. So. And no, I don't think she's a lesbian. I don't know.
Yes, question here.
Ja, guten Tag, Maciej Berlin vom polnischen Rundfunk.
Maciej Berlin from the Polish radio. I have one question for the scriptwriter. I'd be very interested to know which sources you used in doing research for this film. What were your particular sources of inspiration in literature, in historical literature, and last but not least, in art as well? And indeed in art history. And I would also like to put a question to the director. I felt it was very important in this film to take the film music, the score and the sound design into account. I think that made a very great contribution to this film. So perhaps you could say a few words to us about working on the score and generally about the sound design, exactly how it came into being. Thank you.
Non, mais pour répondre à la question qui ne m'était pas adressée concernant la reine Marie-Antoinette.
The question that wasn't put to me about Marie Antoinette, about the Queen, I think the greatest challenge was really opening the Berlin Film Festival, being the opening film. I think that is a great challenge. And I was talking about the Queen. I mean, if she'd known that she would be the opening film at the Berlinale, she would have been absolutely delighted. And that would have cheered her up a bit and lifted her spirits in those very troubled days. I feel like saying that, of course, quite apart from Chantal Thomas' wonderfully written book, I almost forgot about literature, text, sources. I spent hours and hours reading various sources, historians, documents about that era. And indeed specifically about those few days from the 14th of July, that famous night when the king was woken up. He felt nothing was happening, but actually everything was going to fall apart up until the 17th. In fact, we added another day with Benoit. We extended that period of the revolution. And what I was the most fascinated by was the way in which everything went off the rails and became unregulated. The way in which Chantal Thomas talks about this, I think, is a very good basis for thinking about this. That was certainly our underpinning. The question is whether you're working as a historian. I mean, it happens all the time when you're a scriptwriter and you're asked to adapt a chapter from the history of France. Of course, there's always specialists of the era who do not agree. And there are an infinite number of aspects which one could quibble with, of course. Marie Antoinette, of course, was very hard to really get a handle on. She was somewhat ephemeral in a sense. Now, Sidonie was invented, and that gave us a great deal of freedom. There's also a very fascinating source of information for scriptwriters, and that's the internet, Google. If, for example, you've got writer's block, and you wonder what the miracle product was that was used for mosquito bites in the 17th century. Well, you just Google it, and you find out it's rosewood. And that is something that no scriptwriter could ever simply dream up, no matter how rich their imagination. So you spend a lot of time doing that kind of research into all those tiny details. And I think that's more important than the real historic layering. But the really tangible things, the intimate things, I feel are very important. Working with Benoit, focusing on the adaptation, we wanted to be as close as possible to the concrete, tangible sense of those days, to the stench and to the beauty of Versailles in that era. And I think this is something which doesn't really trickle through into many works. In a sense, it's the birth of a very intimate view of the Queen. And I think that's all I have to say for now.
Alors pour continuer sur ce que Gilles vient d'énoncer très
Picking up on what Gilles has just
je dirais que moi,
explained so very precisely, as a matter of fact, what's important to me is to have a screenplay which, even if it talks of the distant past, makes everything that I film as present as possible, so that the actor's performance is very present for us as well, for contemporary audiences. So, elements which make the situations, the characters, their daily lives more intimate, makes matters more tangible, more solid, more present and real, even if they date from a century far, far from ours. That brings them much, much closer to us. As to the music, to pick up on your other question, there's been several films where I've been working with Bruno Coulet, who produced the score, and we worked in a rather unusual way. The music is actually composed pretty much before we start shooting, and that means that that score is an organic, integral part of the film that I want to make. I know more or less what the music is going to look like, certainly what kind of rhythm it will have, even before I start directing, and that's very important to me.
Ja.
Question in the back.
Matthias Dice,
Können Sie bitte aufstehen, damit
Matthias
Sie
Dice,
sehen?
first
Could you
German
stand up?
television, Tagesschau. I have a question for Ms. Kruger. The jury president, Mark Lee, told us here in this room earlier that you cannot watch a film and discuss about a film on Berlinale without noticing what is going on in the world at this moment. So if you see the Arabic Spring in these days, and your film is a little bit about the French Revolution, do you see any actual link between that?
Well, sure, but that is up to the audience to see that parallel. We certainly didn't set out making a movie trying to, resonate with. We couldn't know what is happening today. Any revolution, and in particular this one, obviously is an abuse of power, is an abuse of money, and that is still going on these days. So all of those movies, all of history that has happened is resonant today because we seem as people to continue to make the same mistakes. But you never set out making a movie thinking, oh, this is going to resonate now.
Eine Frage hier vorne, bitte.
Question at the front.
Christine Loranger,
from Montréal. My question is from Mr. Jacot.
comme un artiste du cinéma, d'accord?
And I'm putting this question to you in terms of an artist of the cinema now. Changes of perspective, that's one of the topics of the Berlinale, and you like that in the way in which you film. Changes of perspective in cinematic terms as well. And there's also another change in perspective because we're moving from film stock to digital, and I wonder whether you're ready to make that leap, if you'd be ready to film in digital. I don't know anything about the format that was used for this film. Well, yes, you don't know, and you probably won't know, neither will I, in a sense. But would you be willing and ready to film digital? Oh, yes, it was actually shot in digital. What does that change for you, shooting in digital? Well, to tell you the truth, to be quite sincere, does make some changes, but they're all for the better. I know that that's not what many of my colleagues say. Many of them lament the eras of chemical processing, of film stock. It's my 20th film. I produced 19 of them with traditional film stock and traditional processing. This is the first one that I've shot in digital. And I don't actually think that I'm ever going to go back to traditional film stock. It might be a little silly to say this. It might be a little oversimplified as a response. I don't drive, as a matter of fact. I don't have a car. But it's a bit like saying in the automated age and the era of the car that you actually prefer? Horses, in a way. I mean, saying that we should all work with film is a bit like saying that everyone who drives a car should ride horses. And what about the performance, the acting? Well, yes, you never have that kind of cut that you used to have, that kind of caesura, and it was wonderful because I had enormous long stretches of text. I couldn't sleep for weeks on end. I didn't know how I was going to get it all into my head, and you don't have to worry about Film Moderne. It's the first time she's shot with me. Virginie has already worked with me twice on 2 films actually prior to this one, and we didn't wait either. Well, yes, but you know, if you have film... No, we didn't wait for anything. We just got on with it. It was the same thing on the set as well, and there are colleagues who shoot more slowly than me, and I reckon that for them it was probably a revolution, certainly. A question in the middle?
Hello, Helen Barlow from Australia. Hi. Downton Abbey has been a huge success, the British series around the world, and last year here we had The Women on the Sixth Floor, the French film, talking about the difference in class. This is almost the revolution from the servant's point of view, would you say, Mr. Jacot? And Lea Seydoux, you're here with 2 films. Finally, we see you in a big movie all on your own. Not all on your own, as the star. How does that feel after doing so much work before?
Pardon, mais la question sur la révolution, c'était quoi?
Well, I'm sorry, what exactly was your question about the revolution, precisely?
Is this film seen from the servant's point of view, as Downton Abbey is to an extent in the other series, which has become a big success? It seems to be a kind of theme that's in many films at the moment, including The Women on the Sixth Floor. Upstairs, downstairs, a little bit, but not comedy.
Ah, yes.
Oui, je continue à penser que la lutte de
yes,
classe existe. Oui.
I do think that class struggle continues to exist and that it's a relevant topic as well. I don't know if this film is about class struggle, class against class, but yes, certainly that is touched upon.
Excusez-moi, est-ce que vous pouvez me redire la question?
Well, could you put the question to me again? I'm not quite sure I heard everything. Preferably speaking into a microphone if possible. I'm sorry, but it's not possible to interpret without the microphone being on.
Oui, donc, écoutez, je suis très heureuse d'être là pour 2 films.
Well, I'm very happy to be here for these 2 films. It's the very first time that I've been here. They're very different films. That was that, really. Which 2 films do you mean? The 2 films that are being screened here with you in them? Oh, yes. Oh, yes. And she also wants to know. The lady's asking you how you feel. It's the first time that she sees you really in a major role in a major film. Maybe you could reply to that point. Well, yes, thank you very much. And, yes. Well, yes, I'm very proud. I'm very pleased to be here. Thank you anyway, thank you. Question here on the other side. A question from Mr. Jacot. In 2011, we saw the end of a lot of empires, a lot of reigns, right across the Arab world, for example. To what extent has this atmosphere of the end of reigns, the end of an era, influenced you in making your film, the end of a reign? How is that relevant when we talk about your film? Well, yes, that in a sense is the very quintessence of the film. It's the subject matter of the film. Not even about the influence of this. I mean, that's the real heart of the film. It all turns around at the end of a reign. And personally, I find that kind of end of reign something very positive and fascinating. And so it was exciting and fascinating for me from all kinds of aspects. A question on the right-hand side, right at the front. A question from Ms. Kruger. You look so gorgeous in the film with those wonderful dresses and the wonderful jewelry. And how did you feel in these fantastic dresses? Do you really feel even more womanly, even more feminine, wearing these fantastic dresses. Well, there's always two sides to it in a sense. It's fantastic the very first time that you try them on, the corsets and so on, in the dress rehearsals. It's a real dream, not just for me as an actress, but for me as a woman as well. But it's always a bit tricky. I, in a sense, hate costume films where all you do is look at the production design and the dresses and the hair and all the rest of it. In a sense, you need to forget about that, and I had to forget about that in order to be able to act. In this film, it was very important to me as well to bear in mind this is the end of an era, and the costumes are gorgeous, but it's not the point in time when it was the real climax of that style, when women had ships in their high hairstyles. So you need to see the woman Marie Antoinette here, not just the queen, because it's a very personal impression of Marie Antoinette that we have here. Question from the other side.
From Brazil, and I would like to address the producer about the difficulties about doing a period film like this. Sofia Coppola's film, when she did, she talked a lot about the difficulties to film in Versailles and everything. I would like to know which difficulties you had.
Il n'y a pas eu beaucoup de difficultés, je pense, pour tourner le film à Versailles.
Well, it wasn't so hard to shoot in Versailles. Versailles doesn't open up terribly much. It gives you a chance to shoot on Monday when the castle is closed to visitors, and the other days you can shoot, but the general public is there, which makes it a bit tricky. But bearing that in mind, I think that the work that we did was to find settings in various castles around Paris, and that allowed us to have interior scenes that totally reflected the situation at Versailles, because you can't forget about the Hall of Mirrors, because that's an absolute one-off, and Benoit did very well with his location scouting, because in these other castles you feel as if you're in Versailles, but quite a lot of it is shot in Versailles. We were there for more than a week, but we found links to other castles, as I said, around Paris, these marvellous chateaux, so there wasn't really a problem vis-à-vis Versailles. And as I have the floor, let me just say one thing. Something that I found really intriguing in this film. I bought the rights when Chantal Thomas' book was released in 2002, and what really fascinated me was Sidonie's role, the way in which the story is narrated through her. She's a kind of groupie of the Queen. She doesn't see the world crumbling around her. All of the people in this film focus on their everyday life, and I think that's something which affects all of us. We often have trouble becoming really aware of the way in which the world has been turned topsy-turvy, but you can even think about the wall falling, for example, all kinds of historical events. We often don't realize that the world has changed completely. So we have a costume drama here, and you can feel affected by that today as well. You can learn about today by looking at the past. That's what's striking, and I think that Gilles Benoit's work is absolutely striking. It's very precise, it's very modern.
Ok. Pour les, maintenant c'est pour le Brésil et Portugal. C'est les suivants.
I have one question, if I may. Mr. Jacot, there were two things which I found striking in your film. First of all, the people is made of an inflammable fabric. And the other was, the people does not just want bread, they also want power. A colleague already touched on the question of Ben Ali and so on and so forth. When you started making this film, was there already a sense in the air that the Arab Spring would be coming along, or was it just completely by chance that you started working on a history which, in a sense, is reminiscent of Ben Ali's court, one might say, the Dauphin there as well, and the way in which his regime was overturned? Well, no, of course, there's very different perspectives. Here, there's different places, different situations. We talked about the end of Reigns. All ends of Reigns are similar in a way. There are leitmotifs that occur running through all of them. And in a sense, these phenomena necessarily hang together. It seems to be impossible to do any differently, no matter which ideology or social class you're looking at. The situation is going to unfold in the same way right at the very, very end of a reign, the very last days of total panic, because in a sense it's like a very high-speed shipwreck. Everyone's in a total panic. For millennia and millennia, these eras have had similar common traits, and it's interesting to look at those to identify them, just as we see here in the film. But we should remember too that as far as France was concerned, and indeed perhaps even Europe, those precise days are a point in time when everything pivoted in a very decisive fashion. And that's one of the crucial points in the history of Europe. From Agence France Presse, a question for the actresses. Benoît Jacot is often said to be a feminine filmmaker and a filmmaker of the feminine. Virginie Ledoyen, you know him well, but I wanted to ask the other actresses too, did you feel there was a particular presence of his camera, that you were filmed with a particular kind of tenderness, perhaps one might put it in those terms? Tenderness. Tenderness, that's a nice word. Well, yes, a tenderness and a love of actresses, certainly. But it's true that Benoît is certainly a director who's fantastic at directing young femininity. Well, yes. I think both Lea and Virginie would agree with me on this one. Yes, he sees women not just as objects, not just as beautiful beings. The role that he ascribes to women is very complex. He gives them striking, complex parts as well. That's unusual for a male director as well, to really get inside the psyche of a woman, to get inside her intimate being. So that's very striking. He's got a very clear, precise sense of that. Let me add something as well. There's something that's always very unsettling but very pleasant with Benoît. I've often said this, but I'll say it again. He films actresses very well, with a great deal of desire. But he also produces documentaries on actresses. In a sense, he films the actress playing her role in her part. And I think that's what really gives a real corporality to his films and really puts flesh on the bones of his films. And I think it's wonderful to be directed by him.
Ja, hier vorne bitte. Ja.
Bonjour, Martin Bilodeau du Devoir à Montréal. En fait, dans la continuité de ce dont vous parlez.
Well, you're picking up on what you've just said, and Benoît Jacot, I'd like to hear a little bit from you about this. I was fascinated by the beauty of your actresses, the beauty of the characters too. I wonder about the role of beauty in your decision to choose these three actresses. Well, beauty is not so important unless you have the splendor of truth. I mean, that might be a little over the top. That was Plato who said that. Beauty is the splendor of the true. So a beautiful woman, as far as I'm concerned, is only beautiful if she is true. And what I hope that actresses will do over and above their beauty is that they will be true, that they will be authentic, and therefore that their beauty will be true. Because cinema is an instrument of truth. It's not an instrument of lies, contrary to what many might think, and that's very important to me. Here at the front, there's another question.
My name is Mahar Sigid, African Refugee News. I have a question for the director. Watching your film, I didn't feel going back to the 17th century or 18th century. because the actresses acted like women that we see today. How did you manage to do this? And why did you use the storyteller, the librarian? Because that was really perfect.
Ah oui, oui, c'est un très très bon acteur.
Yes, but she's a very good actress. Well, how should I put this? It's a way of shooting, as Diana was saying, a way of receiving, welcoming the actors, and in this case primarily actresses. So the idea is that I don't set them into a historic world. It's not a setting of the past that's the most important. Of course, they're in costumes, they're in historic settings, certainly, but what's important to me is to give them a sense that there's no caesura between the point in time when they're shooting and what they're supposed to be representing. There's a sense of continuity, in a sense, so they're not talking as they would talk nowadays, certainly. But they didn't act situations that you might imagine one-to-one nowadays. But relates to the way in which you shoot as well, with one sequence, one set of images coming on, following on from another, and I try to show that things have to happen in this way because that's how they have to happen, as if it were in the present. So it's as if all of this were unfolding and unfurling in the present with a certain inner necessity, and so the film gives this sense of presence and indeed of the present. I hope at least. But there's two different ways of making historical dramas. Costume films reconstituting the past. You can do it in a historiographic way, in a kind of antiquarian way, with a desire to depict a world in itself, but a world set apart nonetheless, or, on the contrary, and this is rather my way of working, seeking to render this as present and as contemporary as possible, without any anachronisms, of course, but as present as possible in terms of what you're depicting.
C'est-à-dire que ça m'apportait beaucoup que, par exemple,
it was very important to me that Lea, Diana, Virginie, that they were in their costumes, acting not as if they were wearing special costumes, but as if they were in their own dress at that very moment. They weren't disguised, camouflaged in costume or anything like that. Perhaps I could put this question to the actresses as well. I wonder how you perceived this modern, this sense of the contemporary, and how you experienced what Benoit has just told us about. Well, the actresses, they have to go along with it. It's hard for them to wriggle out of this, in a sense. I mean, you know, I hypnotize them, I mesmerize them, they don't really know what I'm up to. That's what he thinks, anyway. Well, yes, certainly they know what they're doing, but it's very complicated for them to, in a sense, analyze this. In a way I can, because after all, it's up to me to do that. I'm the one who analyzes this and constructs an argument on it, but I'm sure that nonetheless they could say something very intelligent on this if they felt like it, certainly, of course.
No, okay. Eine Frage hinten in der Mitte, bitte.
Question at the back. One question to Ms. Kruger from the ZDF. There's two parts to this question. The Berlinale, you're dear to your heart now. You're on the jury, you presented a film. What does the Berlinale mean to you, and why is it so dear to your heart? What's special about it? And the second question, just briefly, why was this film so important to you and so dear to your heart that it should be the opening film here? Well, I must say, I'm really excited to be here today. I think sort of the few occasions on which I can remember not having slept. I hardly slept a wink last night. I'm German. I'm from Germany, and coming home, it's very different than presenting a film in a different country. And being in the competition is always fantastic, of course. But being the opening film is extra special. And with this role, as well as the French Queen, although she came from Austria, which in those days was part of Germany, it's really it's a dream I would never have actually dreamed to dream that it would become true in 100 years of Babelsberg as well. And I think that this year is something very special. I'm sure I'll remember it all my life.
Well, because I feel like there's similarities to my career, my life. You know, I arrived in Paris pretty much at the same time as Marie Antoinette did. I've learned about the French Revolution obviously in school, but I feel like in a way, what I've learned being in France and becoming to know a culture as a foreigner, especially as a German, is very similar to what I think she must have felt like. And to be in Versailles and to play that part, it was a real moment of, I don't know, I just felt like there was something there that I can't really put my finger on. That just, I feel like this part changed many things for me personally, you know, and also just to be there and to work with Benoit, who I very much respect for his work, and obviously all my other co-stars. But you know, I don't know. I get goosebumps when I read the script. I was born July 15th. My mother's name is Maria Theresa. So you know, a lot of things came together. So I don't know. I just, you know, it's I'm excited and very nervous about tonight.
Ja, eine Frage auf der rechten Seite.
Another question on the right-hand side. First of all, congratulations for this film. I really loved it. One minor point of criticism as to the king, the character of the king. I felt that was kind of weak in a sense, not terribly convincing in a way. Did you want to portray him in this way intentionally, in a sense telling the story of women first and foremost? Did you perhaps neglect the fate of men somewhat?
Is
it me that you're asking? Well, yes, mostly you. Well, it seemed important to me that Louis XVI should appear in a way as a king, as a figure who was indecisive, awkward, almost bourgeois. He was dubbed a bourgeois king at the time. He has an almost immature touch to him. It's in a sense as if the character is not quite complete, it's just sketched out roughly. And that means that in the scene with Diana, that's the one when we really see him for some time. The one when he comes to talk to Diana, and Diana's just had a real nervous crisis, almost a breakdown. He brings a sense of simplicity along with him, a sense of bonhomie, something that I liked very much. It may appear surprising, but I felt that was positive. Xavier Beauvois, of course, is a very famous director. Being an actor is not his main job, so of course, in a sense, it's a choice, but it's a choice that I'm very happy about. And there are several directors acting in the film. There's 3 directors actually acting in the film. Nomilovsky,
il y a Xavier Beauvois,
Xavier Beauvois,
et un garçon qui joue un noble qui s'appelle Jacques Nolot.
and Jacques Nolot.
Metteur en scène français.
So 3 French directors are acting in this film.
Ben, à chaque fois, ils jouent des rôles qui, d'une certaine
Well, they
façon,
play roles
supposent
which, in a
une sorte
sense,
de mise en scène, soit d'eux-mêmes,
presume
soit du monde
a
dans
kind
lequel
of
ils sont.
staging or
Alors, le roi, ça
orchestration
va de soi.
of one's sense, a mise en
Madame
scène.
Campan,
The king, of course, Nomilovsky
met en
was
scène, elle est chargée de la mise en
Madame
scène de
Campan. She's in
l'entourage de la
charge
reine.
of staging the queen's entourage.
Et Jacques Nolot,
And Jacques Nolot,
c'est un...
well,
disons que ce noble, ça, dans le couloir,
he's
je ne sais pas s'il est
a
metteur
nobleman
en scène en état de
in the
panique.
corridors. I don't
Voilà,
know if
quand un metteur en scène ne sait plus
it's a
où
bit
mettre
like
sa
a
caméra, il est un peu
panicked
comme ça.
director. It's a bit like a director who's got no idea where to put his camera, and that came across in that scene in the corridor.
Ja, bei all den Königen wollen wir nicht vergessen, dass wir 3
We shouldn't forget about the king, but there are also 3 wonderful queens, wonderful women here. Farewell, My Queen, the opening film this evening for the 62nd Berlinale. So every success to the film this evening, and wonderful that you're here with us. Thank you for being with us.